Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome everyone to the second in the series of Friday All Bugs Good and Bad webinars. I appreciate you all dialing in today. During this webinar, you will be able to type questions and comments into the chat box, and we have several moderators today. Dr. Kathy Flanders from the Alabama Cooperative Extension System, as well as Charles Pinkston and Bethany O'Rear, Regional Extension Agents with Alabama Extension. And we also have Vicki Bertagnoli-Heller, an Extension Agent and Master Gardener Coordinator with Clemson University. These folks are going to help answer questions as we go along. At the end of the webinar, we're going to take some time to answer some of the questions that may not have been addressed during the presentation, and there would also be a chance for a few survey questions that we would like for you all to answer. Today's presenter in the All Bugs Good and Bad webinar series is Dr. Lawrence Fudd Graham, who is the Alabama Fire Ant Management Program and School IPM Program Coordinator. Dr. Graham will be discussing managing fire ants through the use of baits.
Thanks, Bethany. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about a couple of things today. First, we're going to talk about fire ant management using baits, and that will be toward the end. We're going to discuss a little bit up front about fire ant biology, because if you don't understand that, you don't understand how baits work. We'll talk just briefly about using other forms of insecticides for fire ants, and then we'll finish up taking a look at a little bit of an update on the biological control agents phorid flies. Everybody pretty much in the South has problems with fire ants. Most of the time we don't have to put up signs like this, but as sports-oriented as we are in the South, when you get a football game or some of your athletic programs stopped by fire ants, you know you got a pretty good problem. And I do want to point out that the picture on here that they use on the wire service is from a pasture in Texas. It's a standard picture we have. That was not the football field that we had. Even to the point of in 2013 in Corpus Christi, Texas, a young middle schooler went out at halftime at a football game and got stung by fire ants and actually went into a coma and passed away. So fire ants can be a problem both aesthetically and health-wise. There are a lot of management tools that we have available to use for fire ants. Sometimes this gets confusing when you go into stores and you see fire ant killer, fire ant this, fire ant that. And we have some unconventional tools, too, that people have thrown at us in the past. The one we dealt with most recently was the fact that people spread the word that club soda was a way to kill fire ants. You can look at all of these on here, grits. People used to use gasoline. Just lots of different things that people have said. And the only one that I do know that works for sure and works every time is what we call the brick method. And with the brick method, what you do is you put a fire ant on one side, on one brick, and hit it with another brick, and it will kill them every time. But the problem with that is there's several thousand fire ants in a mound, so you'll be there quite a while, so that's not the way to go. So what we want to talk about a little bit today is how to use fire ant baits and why they work. And one of the reasons that they do is that they do utilize the natural behavior of these ants to distribute their toxicants back to the colony, which is why I mentioned a few minutes ago that we wanted to talk a little bit about their biology today. They're efficient to apply, they're fairly inexpensive, and they are very safe. They use a very small amount of active ingredient when you put them out correctly. As a result, they don't cost very much. And again, using the behavior of the ants actually carry that active ingredient back to the mound and feed it through the colony and to the queen and to the developing immatures. So what happens is you have very little or no residue that's left on your lawn or your pasture. And what we found out is that when you use these things correctly, they are very effective at controlling fire ants. And I mentioned fire ant biology. With any insect, if you want to know how to manage that insect, you do need to know the biology of that insect. And one of the things that I found out in talking with people is that most people don't use baits because they don't understand how they work. And they don't understand how they work because they don't understand the biology of the fire ant. So let's talk just a little bit about fire ants and where they are in this country. This is a map the red imported fire ant, the black imported fire ant, and the hybrid. And you can see the hybrid and the black are located mainly in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And if you take a closer look at this map that Dr. Flanders produced on the EE Extension website, we know where most of these species or mixes of species are in the South. And this will be important a little bit when I talk about phorid flies. But there are two species of fire ant here. There's the black imported fire ant, the red imported fire ant, and the hybrid. Most of the time people think that fire ants come from other people's yards, or they pop up and you have these huge mounds in your yard overnight after a rain. But what we do know is fire ants don't bud like some ants do. They will not break a colony in two and form two separate colonies. Where they're formed is from mating flights by alates or winged forms of the fire ant. And you can see one of those here climbing up and ready to fly off this grass stem. The female is a little larger than the male. She's sort of reddish in color, has a larger head. The male is darker in color and has a smaller head. And these are the only males that occur in the mound. All of the other ant workers in the mound are females. And about 24 to 48 hours after a rain, if you have a mature mound, these alates will climb up and out of the mound and fly up into the air, and they will mate several hundred feet in the air. Once this queen is mated, she will fly back to the ground, and at this point in time, she's basically at the most vulnerable time in her life. She's vulnerable to predators. She's vulnerable to changes in the environment. I've seen ants in hot sand down in South Alabama try to crawl over a bare patch during the middle of the day and actually curl up and die before they can get across. They're also victims of poor judgment. They will fly into pools, into water, and drown, or even into trucks or things of this nature that are reflective in nature. They are from floodplains in South America, so they do sort of look for water to be near. Once this queen comes back down to the ground, she is the sole formation for this new mound. She will remove her wings and she's going to burrow down into the ground, which is fairly nice that they time their flights after a rain so the ground is nice and soft where she can go down into the ground. She'll burrow in, she'll seal the burrow, and then she'll lay a few eggs. And these first group of eggs are going to hatch in about 6 to 10 days. And they're going to start going out and gathering food to feed the queen. From this time on, she's going to lay about a dozen or so eggs a day. She doesn't have many workers to take care of her. And after about a month, she'll have enough workers that they'll begin at that point in time to open up the mound some, to begin foraging well, and to begin construction of a good mound. And she's going to start laying about several hundred eggs a day now once she has enough food coming in to provision her. For the first 3 months or so, this mound may not be visible above ground. Another thing you might want to note, too, is that during the summer and a drought, mounds, if disturbed, will not rebuild, and so until they get new moisture, so it's very difficult and hard to find then. So once you see a new mound after a rain that appears in your backyard, you've got to assume that mound has been in your yard at least for a couple of months. They are not new mounds that just appeared and popped up in your yard after the rain, or one that crawled in from somewhere else. This is what a mound typically looks like. You'll notice there are no openings in the top of the mound. If you've seen most fire ants, you don't notice ants coming out of the top of the mound like you do some pyramid ants and other ants like that where you can see the hole going into the ground. Well, fire ants usually emerge from foraging tunnels around the edges of the fire ant mound. There are tons of interconnected chambers down in this mound that go deep down into the ground. And if you take a look at one of these things below ground, you can have a mature ant colony that encompasses about 300 feet of tunnels underground, and that's a lot of tunnel structure. And the hilly mounds of dirt on top of the mound, where they build up the dirt, actually act as solariums, especially in the wintertime, where they collect heat to warm the fire ants. This particular mound on the left here, you can see, is about 3.5 to 4 feet deep. So they do go deep down into the ground. The workers in the mound range in size. Fire ants are what we call polymorphic. They do have many sizes. They go from smaller ant workers here at the bottom of the circle all the way around to the large workers here at the top. They do have different functions in the mound, and their functions are dependent more upon their age than upon their size. During the first part of their lifetime, they serve as nurses. They take care of the young, and they take care of the queen. During the second part of their lives, they serve as what we call reserves. They're the ones that work on the colony maintenance, and they're the ones that crawl up your legs when you step in the mound and defend the mound. And so they're the ones that are the first there to arrive to sting you once you do disturb that mound. The last part of their lifetime, they serve as foragers. This is the most dangerous part of the ant's life because they're exposed to other predators and things like that. So it makes sense that the foraging aspect of their life cycle is saved to the end. They have complete metamorphosis, which means they do have an egg stage, they have a larval stage, they have a pupal stage, and an adult stage. And when people kick open the mounds, I hear them say all the time, I kicked open a mound and there was this white stuff in the mound, and they were carrying their eggs everywhere. The eggs in a fire ant mound are fairly small. We've actually got a couple of pictures, and they're very, very difficult to see. Usually they're clumped in groups of 5 or 6, and when you kick open the mound, you really can't see the eggs. So what this white stuff is in the mound when you kick it over are the larval and the pupal stages of the mound that the ants are gathering to carry and take to a protected area. From egg to adult usually takes between 28 and 41 days, depending on the temperature. The warmer it is, the faster they develop. The way ants feed one another is also important. If ants go out and they take in solid foods, what they will do is the foragers will bring this back to the reserves. The reserves will take the solid food, and it will go in to the 4th instar larvae. And fire ants, once the egg once the egg hatches, it develops into the 1st instar larvae. This 1st instar larvae, once it grows to a certain size, can't grow in its skin anymore. It will shed its skin into the 2nd instar larvae. They go through 4 instars in fire ants, and the 4th instar larvae of the fire ant is the only stage that can eat solid food. Here you can see a 4th instar larvae, the head capsule portion of it. This is a pouch under the mouth where the solid food is located. And what the larvae will do, it will eat some of this and digest it and sort of regurgitate it to feed other ants a liquid form when they come back. Or it will just sort of spit up some digestive juices into this pouch, and the food will also digest while it's sitting in the pouch. At that point in time, once you get a liquid form, the nurses carry this high-quality food to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd instars that are developing, and to the queen so she can have proteins and the lipids that she needs to lay more eggs. If they bring back liquids in, they come back in, the liquids go to everybody in the colony. So it's this function of having the 4th instar larvae basically serve as the stomach of the mound for solid foods. That's important when you're using baits. So there are 2 types of fire ant management that I refer to. Now, this is just my take on this, but there's proactive management and there's reactive management. Proactive management is going out and doing something about the problem before the problem really gets to be serious. Reactive management is what happens usually with most of the phone calls I get. Someone's wife or friends have been out in the yard, they've been sunbathing, and the ants get on them, and at that point in time, they have to leave their bathing suit off because the fire ants are stinging them too bad. That's when the neighbors called. So this is usually the reactive type when people want their ants killed and they want them killed yesterday. is when I get my phone calls here. So what we want to talk about is looking at fire ants from an integrated pest management standpoint, and using a proactive management style to take care of them. And what we found out is that management of fire ants is site-specific. What I want to do on an athletic field is going to be much different than what I want to do in a pasture. So no single strategy of fire ant management is best for all situations. We have found out, though, that it's better if you treat fire ants after the spring mating flights, once the new queens have had time to set up their mounds, and have some workers out foraging. So if you do a bait treatment, you'll get those newly formed mounds. And we found, too, that if you focus on gradual rather than fast removal here in most of the South, that our slow-acting baits will give you longer-lasting control. So let's take a look at fire ant control using insecticides. If you use what we call fast-acting residual contact insecticides, these are the products you can buy at Lowe's, Home Depot, places like that. These products are going to target the foragers mainly. There's going to be very limited contact to the rest of the colony and to the queen. And this residual activity is going to depend on a lot of things. Number one, how much you use, whether you use the lower rate or the higher rate, and the weather. If you got in a rainy season, you're not going to get as long of control as you will at other times. And these products do both come in granular and liquid forms. Baits, on the other hand, tend to target not only the colony but the queen. Unfortunately, since they have to feed through the colony, as I mentioned before, through that fourth instar larvae, they take longer to kill the colony. And also, you can't send a full toxic dose back to the mound, or the ant workers would not make it back to the mound with a bait granule. So the amount of bait that's on a bait granule has to be a sublethal dose so the ants will have time to take it back into the colony and to feed. And they also have what we call a bioresidual effect, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So let's take a look at the fast-acting residual contact insecticides, our individual mound treatments. You can use granulars or liquids for this. And there are several advantages if you want to go out and do individual mound treatments. And if you have a small yard or limited number of fire ant mounds, this may be the way you want to go. But they're usually very fast-acting if you put them on the mound. They're easy to use for most part. And if you do individual mound treatments, what you're going to do is minimize the residues that you do have in your yard or wherever you use it. But there are some disadvantages to using individual mound treatments also. If you have a large number of mounds in your yard, it takes a while to search for and treat all of these mounds. And if it's during the middle of the summer and it's dry, you might have some of these invisible colonies I mentioned earlier. Or you might have hot, tall grass in your yard or pastures or whatever that hinder the fact that you can find these mounds in your area. So if you're going to go out and treat them in this way, you need to have access to the entire mound too. If you have a mound next to a sidewalk or something like that where the mound is partially under the sidewalk and you apply your treatment, you may be able to kill some of the workers that are on the outside, but they may have the foraging tunnels, and the individuals that are under the sidewalk or in areas where you can't treat can escape through those side tunnels and pop up a few feet away later on. Also, most of these products either must be mixed as a liquid, or if they're granular, they must be watered in. And if you have this problem, you got also the added work of hauling about a gallon or two per mound that you want to treat. What I found is that the best time to treat these mounds for individually is sometime from mid to late fall to early to late spring. When the sun comes up, especially when you have cooler evenings, it's going to warm the mound. And in the summertime, basically it's going to heat up the soil. And I guess the best example that I can give you is that if you've ever been to the beach and tried to walk barefooted across a hot beach in the summertime, you know how you go looking for your flip-flops real quick because your feet start to burn. Well, that's exactly what happens to ants when they try to walk on top of hot soil during the summertime, too. They don't do very well up there. They don't like it. So they don't come out and forage much, even during the heat of the day in the summertime. Basically what they do is they stay down in the mound where it's cool until later in the afternoon or early the next morning when the soil is cool, and that's when they do their foraging. So if you try to do an individual mound treatment during the summertime in the middle of the day, the ants are going to be down here in the bottom of the mound where it's cool, and the odds of hitting the queen and killing her at that point in time are not going to be very good, especially if you're trying to get a couple of gallons of liquid down into soil that's fairly dry in the summertime. On the other hand, if you wait till the fall and in the winter, when you've had a cool night and the ground's cooled off, once the sun comes up in the morning, the solarium effect that you get with the mound up here is going to heat up, and the ants tend to bring the brood and maybe the queen up into this point. And so if you do your treatments when you've had a cool night and you've got a nice sunny day that's warming up this mound, the odds of you getting that queen are going to be much better than they would in the summertime, when odds are she's going to be deep down in the soil. I've mentioned this in meetings time and time again, but I really proved it to myself last fall when I did a test for a chemical company. They were looking at individual mound treatments, and basically what we were looking for was speed of kill with the product that they did. But we went back a month later. We did the test when the temperatures were in the upper 30s, lower 40s at the evening, and during the daytime it was in the upper 60s, maybe low 70s with the sun shining. And we came back a month later, and what I didn't expect to find was that we got 100% kill on those mounds at that individual mound treatment doing at that time of year. And I know I've done treatments like that and tests like that in the summertime and didn't get anywhere near that efficacy. So that timing seems to work very well if you want to do individual mound treatment. Another way to use these products is using these fast-acting contact insecticides as broadcast treatments. And again, you can have liquids and granulars for this. There are several advantages of this. They slow reinfestation for a month or so while the residue is still out on the yard. And how long it works is going to be dependent on which rate you use and what the activity of that residual is in your yard. So you usually get rapid colony control from these because basically you've got insecticide over the whole area. The disadvantages, though, is that you have to have complete coverage in the area. And if you use granular products, some of these may need to be watered in, either with irrigation or somehow. If you're putting it out in your yard, you're leaving residues in sensitive areas where your kids will play, where dogs will run around, and where you could basically get into it if you get in your yard. And most of these products are not selective. Not only do they kill fire ants, they kill other beneficial insects that might be in the area too. So let's talk a little bit about fire ant baits and start off with basically what is a fire ant bait. Basically, a fire ant bait starts with a carrier. It's usually something that can absorb oil and will be used to deliver the active ingredient to the ant mound. To this, you add an attractant. It may also help carry the active ingredient, and basically it serves as a food source that the ants think they will be carrying back to the mound. Most fire ant baits use some type of vegetable oil. Fire ants do like lipids. And what you add into that is the active ingredient that will kill the fire ants. And this may be a growth regulator or a metabolic inhibitor. And you put that all together, what you get is a bait, and if you spread it in your yard, hopefully what you'll see is the ants picking this up, thinking it's a nice, tasty morsel, and taking it back to share with their queen in the mound. Other problem I have when I make presentations like this is that people tend to get confused a lot of times between baits and granular insecticides. They look similar. Baits are granular in form, but just because you have a granular insecticide does not mean it's a bait. So you need to check your labels very well, because a lot of the baits that are out there now, as opposed to in the past where they all had fire ant bait prominently featured on the front of the container, some of them now say fire ant killer, and you have to read a little bit further on the label to make sure that you are getting a bait and not getting a fire ant insecticide granule. Now, there are a lot of advantages for using fire ant baits to manage your fire ant population. Again, the ones I covered earlier, they do use the natural behavior of the ant. They're efficient to apply. There's a very small amount of insecticide that goes out when you use these products. Relatively low cost. The ants do the work for you because they carry these things back to the mound to feed to the queen. And again, there's little or no residue. I can remember when we did a test up at the Speedway at Talladega, about an hour after we spread the bait, we went out to look to see if we could find the bait and see if we were having a fairly even and good application. And we couldn't find any bait. We actually dug into the fire ant mounds and found out that most of the workers had picked up the bait and carried it back into the mounds within an hour at that particular situation that afternoon. There are some disadvantages to using fire ant baits, though. You need to time the application of your bait to the foraging behavior of the ant. And especially sometimes if you're dealing with city workers, with schools, things of this nature, this timing can be inconvenient because it's usually early in the morning or late afternoon. Again, in the summertime, when most of the baits will be applied, ants don't forage well during the heat of the day. So you've got to time those applications when the ants are active and we'll be picking it up. Again, getting back to the control, baits are going to take 1 to 8 weeks to work. And again, most of the calls I get, most people want their ants dead yesterday. And if you're going to work with baits, that's not going to work. And these things are very difficult to apply at low rates if you don't use the proper equipment. So those are the 3 big disadvantages as I see with fire ant baits, but they're nothing that we can't overcome. There are several types of active ingredients that are used in baits. The first is a metabolic or nervous system inhibitor. These actually kill the fire ant workers themselves. And again, I mentioned earlier, you can't have a toxic dose in the bait. You have to have a sublethal dose so they can carry this back to the mound. But the most common ones on the market now are hydromethanol, which works in 1 to 4 weeks. It's sold in the products that you see listed under here. If you'll notice, too, those of you that have pastures that are interested in putting it on pastures, the ones I have listed in green are labeled for pastures in Alabama. You need to check for your state if you're in another state, but most of these are all labeled for pastures. Another product is spinosad. It works in usually 3 days to 2 weeks. We have the products listed under here. Spinosad, some products are OMRI listed and can be used in organic production. There's also abamectin, which works in 1 to 4 weeks. It's sold as a ward too. Up until about 2 years ago, there was a product, a ward, on the market that used a different growth product that was a growth regulator, but since it just switched to ward 2 about 2 years ago, and now they have abamectin as their active ingredient. And there's also Max Force FC fire ant bait, which works in about 2 to 4 weeks. My arrow's pointing to a website down here that is on the E-Extension site by Paul Nestor. All of these products that are listed up here are labeled for different sites. And I'm not going to go into all of the sites. I did want to mention pastures because people are always interested in that. But if you'll go to Paul's site here, it will be on the next few slides, and you can take a look. Some of these products aren't found over the counter in Home Depot, Lowe's, your co-op, places like that. Some are only in specialty type shops. For dealers that usually work with landscape businesses or pest control businesses. There's two others that are out there. Indoxacarb is one that works in 2 to 5 days. It is sold as a product called Advion. I mentioned that most of our fire ant baits have active ingredients that are in sublethal doses. Indoxacarb in Advion is not one of those active ingredients. Indoxacarb is what we call probate. It is not actually toxic in the form that it is on the bait. Indoxacarb must be metabolized by the ant or insect in some form or fashion and broken down into its toxic components. So with Advion and Indoxacarb, they can actually carry a toxic dose back to the mound because they don't eat it. And once they begin spreading it, it works much faster than the others. Metaplumazone came on the market last year as Siesta. It had been on the market as Altrabun a little bit before then. It works in about 3 to 14 days. And I do know that if you're working with ornamental horticulture, that Siesta has now got a label to where it can be used in nurseries for meeting the requirements of the fire ant quarantine protocols that you need to ship outside of the fire ant areas. Two growth regulators that are on the market now, pyriproxyfen and methoprene. You'll notice these take longer to work. These products do not kill the fire ant workers. They allow the workers to die of old age, but the immatures do not develop, and the queen will begin laying sterile eggs once they have this product into the mound. So the delay in having complete control here comes from the fact that these workers have to die of old age. But these are very effective products too, because I mentioned earlier that the slower the mounds die, actually the longer control you're going to get. There is one product mixture on the market, Extinguish Plus. It is a mixture of methoprene and hydromethanine. With it usually starts working in about 2 to 4 weeks, but since you do have the growth regulator in there, you get this extended control, or what I call a bioresidual. So why aren't baits used more? Most of the time, people want control immediately. They want it yesterday. People don't usually understand how they work, and they confuse them with granular insecticides on a regular basis. And the last one is they are difficult to apply at label rates, and we'll talk about a way to apply these here shortly. What we found out, though, that if you go ahead and put out an application, here's the application date here. The pink line is your Amdro, which is a metabolic inhibitor, and you can see it kills fairly fast. The knockdown was fairly quick. The yellow line is growth regulator Extinguish Plus. You can see as the workers die slowly on their own of old age, it doesn't work quite as fast. And here in the middle is the product mixture Extinguish Plus. That product wasn't on the market when this test was done, but it was a half and half mixture just like that's in the product now. Again, you don't get quite as quick a knockdown as you do with Amdro alone, but you still get this extended control with it. And you can see out at about a year, and this was a good year, this was put out late in the fall, you still got good control into early spring, and you can see that the Amdro rebounds faster than the other two. Again, we put out a second treatment here, and again, you still get longer control having the growth regulators in the product. And even when you do start to get your rebound, you don't get as big a rebound with the growth regulators as you do with your Amdro. And the reason behind this is what I call the bioresidual effect a while ago. And basically what this is the overall killing power of the technology or the active ingredients in the bait plus the associated natural biological mortality. And this natural mortality is what causes that delay. I want to preface this with there is an exception to this. If you're in an area where you have multiple queen fire ant mounds, which is going to be parts of Texas and some isolated pockets in Alabama, and you have multiple queens, you don't have territoriality between the fire ant mounds. Most of the South has monogyne or single queen mounds, and the ants in these mounds are territorial. So what happens is your growth regulator is working on the immatures and the queen producing sterile eggs, and your workers are dying of old age. They're still defending their territory. And as new fire ant queens fly in to set up new mounds, they kill those fire ant queens. One of the greatest sources of natural mortality from predators and fire ants is from other predators in areas where you have monogyne colonies, which is most of the Southeast. So this bioresidual actually comes from the fire ants dying slowly and preventing reinfestation by new queens flying in for mating flights. I mentioned bait application is difficult and sometimes it's tricky. You want to make sure you apply your bait at temperatures somewhere between 70 and 85 degrees. In the spring and in the fall, you can find days when it's wonderful to apply bait all day, but in the fall and in the heat of the summertime, the best time to do this is in the late afternoon. We usually, if we're applying bait in June, July, and August, won't begin spreading the bait until at least 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and depending on the temperatures, if they're very high, we won't start spreading bait until 4 o'clock. You can also do this in the morning if you don't have a heavy dew, but I do like afternoon bait applications better because the ants can continue foraging into the night, whereas if you make a early morning application around 10:30 or 11 when the ground starts to heat up, they will quit foraging at that point in time. And if the bait has an opportunity to stay out in the sunshine during the day, being small particles with very small amount of usually oil on them, they'll tend to dry out during the afternoon, and by the time the ants come back out to forage that evening, they won't be as attractive to them as a bait particle as they would have been earlier in the morning. You don't want to apply the baits if a rain is expected within 4 to 12 hours. I think most of the labels say 12 hours, but we've done a couple of studies where we've gotten rain after 4 hours and still gotten good control. You want to make sure your bait is stored in a cool, dry place. It does have a vegetable oil on it as a carrier, and this will go rancid if it gets hot. You don't want to store your baits with any other products, such as pesticide, gasoline, or any volatile chemicals that have odors. It was shown in a test at Clemson University that the fire ant baits can pick up some of these odors, and once they do, they're not as attractive to the fire ants as fresh bait that have not been exposed to these odors. Also, you only want to buy what you will use each year, and again, this bait can go rancid after a while, so if you get a special deal and get enough to last several years, I would not recommend doing that because you could end up with bad bait after a couple of years setting up. You want to only broadcast during the warmer months. I have broadcast a fire ant bait in November before, and it was a warm day, but we basically put bait on about 70 acres and did not get control very well at all. After October 15th, it seems that the ants don't forage as far from their mounds. The ground's cold. They don't tend to go out as far, ranging, looking for baits. So these are rules of thumb. From October 15th until April 15th, I don't recommend broadcasting baits, but you can do individual mound treatments year-round. I've done these. You can sprinkle the bait around the mound on a warm winter day. The ants do come out close around the mound and do some foraging, and they tend to pick up most of the bait that you put around, and you can get fairly good control. Not quite as good as you can in the summertime, but you can get fairly good control in the wintertime doing individual mound treatments. And you can mix this product with a fertilizer, too, if you make an application immediately after mixing. For many years, we said do not mix fire ant baits with anything else to put it out, but we have found that working with fertilizers, you can do this. We did a study several years ago where we went to the co-op and blended fire ant baits with fertilizers. This saves you a trip across the field. That's one of the expenses that you can cut out. What we were looking for was an economic alternative for livestock producers, and we wanted to take a look at how efficacious these products were too. So we went to the co-op as we were mixing the blended fertilizer. We added the fire ant bait. We put it out late in the afternoon, and what we found out is that we got fairly good control. The blue line here is our control. This was a hot, dry period when we put this test out, and you can see that we got a rain right after we did our initial counts, and our numbers in our control plot went up. The pink line is the fertilizer control, where we applied fertilizer only, and it looks like here that maybe the fertilizer did something, but if you look at the numbers along the way, there's not much difference between the beginning and ending numbers with the fertilizer. It was just a slight dip in here, and again, I think this comes from us having a hot, dry summer. But you can see that the products that we did apply works fairly well. The Esteem is the yellow, it's a growth regulator. The Esteem plus fertilizer is the green. You can see after about a couple of months, it worked just as good as Esteem alone. Never understood why it took longer to work, but it worked just as well eventually as the Esteem alone. And also our other product, Extinguish Plus and fertilizer, again, the mixture worked fairly well. And again, at the beginning of the next spring, we started out with very low fire ant numbers here. So you can mix it with fertilizer and get fairly good control in your fields. If you're going to broadcast this product, again, you need to have some equipment. Handheld spreaders and belly bump spreaders are good if you can get your openings closed down small enough to where you only put out about 1.5 pounds of bait per acre. That's the rate that most of these products pull out at. And if you're using these, this is where you can get your exercise in the summertime, because you tend to need to walk fairly fast while you're putting these products out. If you're going to spread them over a large area, these are the only two spreaders that I know of at the present time that do a good job, that you can calibrate them low enough to put out 1.5 pounds per acre. This is a herd seeder. This is a Vicon seeder here. The herd seeder has special plates that you can see up here at the top. These are calibrated for different baits and for different speeds. The largest opening here is just larger than the size of a pencil. And to put out most of your baits, you have to run somewhere between 5 and 10 miles an hour in the field to apply the bait coming out of a hole this small. They also have a special agitator in the bottom of the herd seeder here. It does not spin. It looks more like an old potato masher that rubs across the opening here to prevent the fire ant bait from lodging in that hole. If you try to use another kind of spreader that does have the spinner in the middle and just a wide opening, if you try to close the opening down small enough to where you get out 1.5 pounds rate per acre, the bait usually ends up lodging and you don't get an even spread. So these are one of the best spreaders that you can use. So how do I put fire ant baits out to make them work? If you won't have low tolerance for fire ants and you don't want many in your yard, what we recommend here in Alabama is to broadcast a fire ant bait in late spring, early June. Late spring, May to early June. Then if you miss a few and no treatment, no matter what you use, is 100%, go back and treat individual mounds during the summer as needed, and then come back and apply a second bait treatment in the fall, sometime around mid-September. This can be adjusted as you're moving north or south from central Alabama. And what we've done, too, is a lot of times we can't base it on time. We have to base it on land use. We did the Ag Heritage Park here at Auburn University for a while, treated in the spring and fall, and we would usually treat 2 weeks before football season started, and tailgaters came in, and then we would treat again in the springtime about 2 weeks before the farmer's market began. So we timed our treatments more on use than on time. If you have pastures and hay fields and you want to get a fairly low-cost treatment, you can broadcast a fire ant bait with a growth regulator in late spring, or late summer, or early fall. If you do have fire ant problems that are a bad problem now, and you need to go ahead and take them out in that hay field, you're tearing up equipment, you can apply a fire ant bait now. And then what I found that works best for me in my pastures with my horses is to go on another schedule of fall application with a growth regulator. And depending on your population numbers, you may be able to skip a year. Sometimes this works well. They just don't build up in between. If you have small areas, or if you do have low mound numbers, baits can be very effective as individual mound treatment if you don't need immediate removal. Because again, baits are going to take a while to work. And in some areas, especially in pastures, things like that, you may be able to apply what we call a skip swap treatment and still get adequate control. What you do is you apply your bait every other pass at a full rate and then skip a pass, apply bait at a full rate and skip a pass, and basically what you will get is an effective rate of half of your label rate. But I want to point out this. In Alabama and in Texas, this is a legal proposition. You need to check with your state laws on pesticide application to make sure that a skip swap treatment is legal in your state. I know that a couple of states will not allow you to use a product lower than the label rate, so do check with that. Okay, covered baits here, and I can ask some questions a little bit later. Let's talk about the phorid flies. These are biological agents of fire ants that we have released in the southeast. They're interesting parasitoids in that they do partition their resources, and they fly and attack fire ants at different times of day. They attack different ant behaviors. They attack different size fire ant workers, and they attack at different times of the year. The phorid flies hover just above the fire ants when they're out there, and they will take about 1/10 of a second to lay their egg into the thorax of the fire ant. Once this ant is injected into the fire ant, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to develop inside the ant as a maggot. It crawls up into the ant's head, lives there for most of its life cycle, and then once it starts to pupate, it will secrete an enzyme that will make the ant's head fall off. The ant's head then drops down. The larva will kick out the mandibles, kick off the antenna, and then it will use the ant's head for its pupal case. Hang on just a second. Was not able to get to my buttons there to advance this. Here we go. At that point in time, you can see the pupil here inside the ant's head capsule. This is what the pupil looks like. The only thing that the fly maggot has to do when it turns into a pupa is sclerotize one end here, so it's a very energy efficient way for the phorid flies to pupate. We have 6 phorid flies that are in the United States now. The first one that was released was Pseudacteon tricuspis. This particular fly attacks red imported fire ants and medium to large workers. You can see the size range of the workers here that Pseudacteon tricuspis attacks. I mentioned earlier when I showed the map that we were looking for that we had mapped out where the red imported fire ants, the hybrid imported fire ants,
Do you still have an audio connection, or did your sound cut out? I think we may have lost Fudd. He will probably try to dial back in, but meanwhile, does anyone have any questions? If so, please enter them in the chat box, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Meanwhile, perhaps, Suzanne, could you post the poll questions? I know we're not quite done with the webinar, but if you wouldn't mind, those of you that are still on while we're waiting for Fudd to come back and wrap this up, perhaps if you can help us with some evaluation of this webinar. Thank you very much, and hopefully we will have Fudd back soon.
Hey, are y'all still there? Hello?
Yeah.
We are.
I have no idea what happened.
That's weird. We're glad you're back. We just were having the participants help us by evaluating you, even though we know you're not quite done. So if you want to just go ahead and resume.
I can do whatever we need to. I apologize for that. I don't know. I had someone try to call in, and I ignored it, and all of a sudden everybody went away.
That happens. So, Suzanne, if you could take the poll questions down, we could have Fudd finish up. Would that work?
Yep.
Thanks, all.
Can everyone still hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we're ready to go. I'm sorry about that, everybody, but I got cut off. I don't remember where I was, but before I got cut off. But I was talking about. I mentioned earlier that we did map out where the hybrids, where the reds, and where the black imported fire ants were in the southern region, where we do have differences. And one of the reasons that we made such an extensive map is that these phorid flies are actually specific for either the reds or the black fire ants too. So we wanted to know where those locations were, so we would know which particular phorid fly or biotype of phorid fly to release. Pseudacteon tricuspis was first released in 1997, and you can see it's fairly well spread across the whole of the southeast. The golden colored areas are where we do know that the fly exists, and the lighter colored areas are where we highly suspect that it is also located. The second that was released here was Pseudacteon curvatus. It's a very smaller fly that attacks medium to small workers. There were actually two biotypes of it that were released. One was specific to the red imported fire ant and the hybrid. It came from Las Flores, Argentina, and the one from Formosa, Argentina, was specific for the black imported fire ant. And these, again, they have done well, and they are covering the entire southeast pretty much. Again, the light pink areas are where we suspect they are highly or expect them to be. Pseudacteon littoralis attacks the largest fire ant workers. It likes the very big workers. It, again, likes the red imported fire ant. It was released in Alabama, Florida, and Louisiana, but the only place that it ever was established was in Wilcox County here, and it has now spread to 4 counties that we found it in. Pseudacteon obtusus attacks medium to large-sized workers. We've also released this particular species in Alabama, but we can't get it to take here for some reason, but it is established in one county in Georgia, in Florida, in Mississippi, and in Texas. Another species that attacks the smaller workers is Pseudacteon cultillatus, and in fact, I mentioned a while ago that there were 2 types of fire ants, either multiple queen areas or single queen areas. The multiple queen areas are called polygyne areas, and what we noticed in polygyne areas is that the workers tend to be smaller. And what we think is that probably Cotyledus is going to be more effective and established better in areas where we do have these polygyne workers, since they do attack the smallest workers. And they have been established, the only 2 sites that I know of now are counties in Florida. We've tried these in Alabama again and have not had any success with them here yet. Another species that we have is Pseudacteon nocens. It attacks small to large workers, and I think Ed LeBron has it established in 3 sites in Texas. So that's about all I have. I just want to remind you, if you do have questions about fire ants, to go to the E-Extension Fire Ant website. This is a place to get great information for it. And now I'll take those questions. Sorry about that, guys. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're still online.
Okay.
We thought we might get some questions coming through on the chat box there. So.
And
okay.
also, for all the attendees, if you would, please click on that link that you'll see on the last slide of the PowerPoint, our Qualtrics survey. We'd like to have your information recorded in that venue as well. All right, do we have any questions? All right, I see one here.
You want to read it to me? I don't know which.
Sure. What is the impact of the biocontrol agents? Do they eliminate nests or colonies?
No, they do not eliminate. What we're hoping is this. Down in South America, they have a lot of natural enemies of the fire ant. They are not as much of a problem in South America. They don't cause many at all. And what we're hoping will happen up here is that these natural enemies will... the fire ants are actually afraid of these flies. If you've ever watched flies attack, like I have, you can see that the ants are scared. So they don't forage as well. They don't provision the mound as well. And so we're hoping that they will make the ants less competitive so our native ants can actually help manage some of these populations too. So basically, we're just trying to set up that balance to where our native ants can compete better against the fire ants.
Okay, another question, Fudd, is do you recommend 2-step fire ant control?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. If you have ant mounds that you need to get rid of in a hurry, again, if you looked at my low tolerance plan, it was spread bait and then come back and do individual mound treatments later. That was basically the 2-step. I just didn't use it in those terms.
Okay, another question, do any of the parasites attack queens?
Attack queens?
Yes.
No, they do not. The parasitoids, the phorid flies, do not go down into the mound looking for fire ants. They're going to be out attacking either disturbed mounds or along foraging trails. Well, so they attack while the ants are outside of the mound. If there are any that go into the mound looking for ants, I don't know of them.
Okay. Another question is any insecticide resistance?
With baits? No, I've not heard any insecticide resistance with any products on fire ants, as a matter of fact, especially not with baits. And one of the things we did look up in bait, on baits too, is there's so many classifications, insecticide classifications that the baits fit into that we haven't seen any resistance with any of them. So.
Okay, great. Well, we appreciate everybody tuning in today. Once again, if you will, please click on the link that you see on your screen there for our Qualtrics survey, which is an in-depth evaluation, but it won't take you but just a few minutes to complete. And once again, we appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll have another one of these next month, so please tune in for that one as well. Thank you.